So after the massive global COVID-19 vaccination campaign, a truly unprecedented event in medicine, two completely different stories started to bubble up. They came from totally separate places, and they painted two pictures of what was going on inside our bodies that just could not both be true.
Okay, let's just dive right into the heart of it. How could one single event lead to two stories that are polar opposites? Really, one story, which you can find in a bunch of online documents, talks about a secret signal, part of some huge global surveillance network. The other, which unfolded in the pages of top-tier medical journals, described a rare and sometimes fatal medical syndrome. So we're going to break down exactly what each of these sources claim.
All right, let's start with narrative 1, the VAXNet signal theory.
Now, according to these source documents, VAXNet isn't just some weird side effect, it's the whole point. The basic idea is that the vaccines are actually a delivery system for a hidden surveillance network. The theory claims they create a network of tiny transmitters inside the body using the 2.4 GHz frequency, yep, the same one as Bluetooth, which basically turns people into walking, trackable nodes.
And what's really interesting here is how the theory gets built. It's not just a vague claim. The documents lay out this whole, well, they call it a weaponized stack of components. They explain how the mRNA is the payload, while things like graphene oxide and hydrogel supposedly act as a built-in antenna, all of it leading to what they call BLE-MAC emissions, basically a short-range biological broadcast.
To back all this up, proponents of the theory often point to very specific documents as their evidence, and a real cornerstone for their argument is this Chinese patent. Now, this patent describes a nano-vaccine that uses graphene, and the crucial part for them is that the patent itself mentions it has the potential for an electromagnetic response. The VAXNet documents take that and say, see, that's the key to the whole signal.
So where's the proof for all this? Well, a lot of it comes from screenshots just like these. They're from a mobile app called the Bluefang Vax Detector. The claim is that when you run this app, it picks up these anonymous Bluetooth signals that only seem to appear around people who've been vaccinated. And because these signals aren't tied to any known manufacturer, that's interpreted as proof that they're coming from a biological source.
And from there, the whole story gets even bigger, pulling in government logistics. The theory laid out in these documents is that an agency like FEMA is basically the backbone for this whole network. They're the ones coordinating the rollout, using their communication towers to relay the signals, and even using emergency acts to get around things like consent. It's how the theory goes from a single person being a node to a full-on national grid.
Okay, let's switch gears completely. Now we're going to talk about narrative 2, the VITT syndrome findings. This story didn't unfold on forums, it happened in peer-reviewed medical journals.
So researchers started to identify this rare but very serious medical syndrome. They called it VITT, or sometimes TTS. This is a real clinical diagnosis, and it's defined by a really weird and specific set of symptoms. You've got thrombosis, which means dangerous blood clots, often in strange places like the brain, happening at the exact same time as thrombocytopenia, which is a super low level of platelets, the very cells that are supposed to help your blood clot. It's a bizarre and dangerous combination.
And just to be clear, while this syndrome was identified as very, very rare, the medical literature also showed it was incredibly serious. This number, 40%, that was the mortality rate found in one of the very first big case studies published. It just goes to show how severe this condition was for the small number of people who actually developed it.
The clinical studies also started to map out a pretty clear timeline. The data showed that symptoms, like a really severe persistent headache or bad abdominal pain, would typically show up somewhere between 5 and 16 days after someone got certain types of the vaccine. This timing, this temporal link, was a really key piece of the puzzle for the researchers who were investigating the syndrome.
So what do they think was causing this, biologically speaking? Well, this diagram from a medical review shows the leading hypothesis. It's a really complex autoimmune reaction. The theory is that the vaccine, in these very rare cases, could trick the body into producing these specific antibodies. They're called anti-PF4 antibodies that then mistakenly go and activate platelets. And this massive activation is what causes the clotting and the platelet depletion that defines this syndrome.
And the consequences of this were documented with actual clinical imaging. Look at this. On the left, you've got a cardiac MRI showing inflammation in the heart muscle. And on the right, brain scans that are revealing cerebral venous thrombosis. That's a clot in the veins of the brain. This is the kind of hard clinical evidence that was being documented in medical journals straight from patient case files.
So you see where this is going, right? How do these two completely different narratives build their cases?
Well, it all comes down to a tale of two very, very different kinds of data.
This quote from the VAXNet documents really just says it all, doesn't it? It perfectly captures that worldview. Evidence isn't something you find in a blood test. It's a signal that the body itself is emitting, and the system, in this case a phone app, is the tool you use to confirm it. The truth in this story is a broadcast.
Now, contrast that with this. To diagnose VITT, doctors weren't looking for a radio signal. They were looking for a very specific checklist of clinical markers in a patient's blood. We're talking about things like severely low platelets, super high D-dimer levels, which point to clotting, and most importantly, the presence of those very specific anti-PF4 antibodies. The evidence here is biological, and you measure it in a lab.
So let's just lay it all out, side by side, because it couldn't be clearer. On one hand, the VAXNet theory. Its claim is a secret surveillance network. The mechanism, graphene and Bluetooth signals. The evidence, app scans and patent filings from online documents. Then you have the VITT medical findings. The claim is a rare autoimmune disorder. The mechanism, those anti-PF4 antibodies. The evidence, blood tests and imaging studies from peer-reviewed medical journals. The same starting point, but two totally different realities.
And all of this leaves us with one final, and I think really important question. When you're presented with such wildly different kinds of data, from a screenshot of a smartphone app to the results of a blood test, how are we supposed to navigate that? How do we decide what to believe when the very idea of what counts as evidence is the thing that's being debated?